Welcome, everyone. Uh, we are coming to you live from COP26 with this, our 12th daily podcast from Glasgow. I'm Casey Schulberg, your host, along with my friend, the Kiss Me Waterkeeper, Dr. John Capece. Hello, John.
Hi, Casey. I don't know if you can tell, but they've got a mighty big party going on next door. I think they're
We hear it a little bit. Yeah, we're going to be
over climate change.
So
they're solving the hydrologic problem with vast quantities of wine.
Of libation. Right, yes. Right. So here at the COP, there were two potentially important developments in the past 24 hours. The first was a draft agreement released last night calling on countries to phase out coal power and flesh out deeper cuts in carbon emissions by next year in order to reach that goal of limiting warming this century to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is notable because if adopted, it would amazingly be the first time that a COP has officially called for eliminating fossil fuels. And it builds on a statement on international support for clean energy transition that was announced November 4th, 1 week ago, that reined in public financing of fossil fuels. That agreement was signed by 31 countries, including the United States and Canada, which is actually the largest state financier of fossil fuels. The current proposed draft would go further. It shortens the time frame for revised targets for countries known as nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, to next year, much sooner than the requirement of every 5 years as laid out in the 2015 Paris Climate Accord. But don't get your hopes up for global buy-in. The UK put a pin in that balloon by declaring straight out of the blocks that it will not sign the agreement, leaving a small collection of countries who presently support the deal, the largest of which is France. Now, this is still just a draft. We won't see the final language till tomorrow. Maybe other countries will hop in. It's still disappointing to see the host country so far refusing to sign up. It kind of prompted UN head Antonio Guterres, who has now said the attempt to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as agreed in Paris 6 years ago, was on life support. And meanwhile, as may be expected, the fossil fuel industry is not just rolling over and playing dead. There is no short supply of fossil fuel lobbyists here at COP. In fact, with 503 registered oil and gas lobbyists, the fossil fuel lobby is larger than any one national delegation. To make matters worse, a consulting company hired by the organizers, Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, also consults for 19 fossil fuel companies around the world, creating a messaging nightmare for the organizers and playing perfectly into the hands of activist students and protesters convinced the system is corrupt. Oil does have a slippery slope. The other interesting development was the unexpected announcement of a US-China deal on emissions last night, with live presentations by US climate envoy John Kerry and Chinese climate envoy Xi Shenhua. The announcement, though scant on details, was welcomed by global figures and climate experts. It's at least good to see a dialogue between the two largest emitters of greenhouse gases. So look for more on these two stories tomorrow. We're hoping to bring you updates as they come. So Waterkeepers have a great alliance and lock arms all over the world to help and support each other. At the same time, there are often other important NGOs working in a similar space with whom we can collaborate. So I'd like to share an interview we conducted here at COP with Nicolas Imbert. He's the director of Green Cross in France and French territories and the associate director of Green Cross International. Green Cross International was founded by Mikhail Gorbachev in 1993, building on the work started by the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. So let's hear from Nicolas.
So I have a debt of gratitude to my friend Frédéric Laurent, who's been trying to get me together with Nicolas Imbert for a year, and we finally found the occasion here at COP26. So thank you, Fred, for introducing us. Nicolas Imbert is the French and French Territory Director for Green Cross and the Associate Director for Green Cross International. So Nicolas, welcome. And what is your mission here at COP, and how can we help you?
Thank you very much for getting in to me. And it's really important for Green Cross to be there at the COP, and specifically for me to be there as well. Because in 1992, our president, which is Mikhail Gorbachev, was not the president of USSR anymore, but he was the moderator of the first Rio Conference for Climate. And he decided at the end of the conference that it was of key importance to create a new organization, Green Cross, on the model of the social-oriented Red Cross, in order to help with the environment and to ensure humankind an unburdened future. So this is why our story in Green Cross is very much interpenetrated with the story of the conference of parties. Now, we know how important it is to act concretely for a safe environment, specifically if we want to continue living on planet Earth. And in order to do so, water has a very, very specific role. Not only because we need water everywhere, we need water from a well every day, but we also need to cope with better water management, to get out of water pollution, and to keep the resource safe of water scarcity, drought, extreme events. And we have to commit on an ambitious action plan now, but also to connect between organizations on what is important in keeping our water courses in good condition, because we want to continue living close to them.
So it sounds as though we're somewhat in sync, the Waterkeeper Alliance. We dream big, and we're here to hear big ideas, but we're also doing specific action on the ground in all over the world. So tell us about what you're doing in UVA, for instance, in the Polynesian Islands, French territory.
So what we are doing in UVA is important now, because UVA is said to be the closest island to the paradise, but it's also a very low island. We have to imagine that the top of the hills in UVA are only 6 meters high, and they have some local water sources, not so much. Up to now, they rely on desalination, not because this is the technology they chose, but because this is the only available technology. They are trying to find out different ways, and specifically some nature-based solution to find out some fresh water. But the problem they are facing is that due to the sea level rising from basically, I would say, day to day, the fresh water inside the island is getting salty, and so by getting salty, it's more and more difficult to use it on a daily basis. So if we want to, for local communities in UVA to continue living on their island, and that's why we are working with them, we have to be connected to the other island and to find out solutions which are the proper solution for their local drinking water, for their local agriculture, and basically to answer them a proper future. Yeah. And this is why we have to connect solutions globally, and why we have to connect as well between organizations on a global basis. For example, in the Paris COP26, when there has been the Paris Agreement, it was one of the first time in the COP history the word water was in, but it was not an article, it was in the preamble, which is a starting point. From them, we decided that Green Cross as an organization has to put the topic of water up in the climate agenda, and specifically at the COP level. In Madrid, in COP25, we made what we call an Act 1 for local water governance and management, saying that if we want the climate to find out solution in a short time frame. This solution can be very much linked to water, and your example is a very good example, but the 146 NDC, nationally determined contribution, that are on the conference table now are stating up water as a top priority, so there are many examples. And what we are not so comfortable yet is to demonstrate that the solutions can be implemented now, and they have to be put high on the agenda of local governments. So that's why in September this year, we made an Act 2 for local water management in Dunkirk with 17 proposals dealing with local democracy as involving youth, involving the business, involving the local governments, so that to put water high at the local government's agenda, circular economy as sources of solution, and integration of action plan between water, land and soil restoration, food system, local city management, transportation, and basically every activity we need to govern at local scale with respect to climate and environmental resilience. And this is not only an environmental problem, but it's a question, and another example in Bangladesh is very important about this, of peacekeeping and maintaining a safe environment for everybody. We know how important it is now to keep healthy humans on a healthy planet, because we learned, or at least I suspect we learned, about what happened with COVID-19, and we don't want this to happen again. And this is really a very good momentum for change.
Well, Nicolas, we celebrate you. Thank you for your work here, and we hope to be able to work in closely together. It sounds as though there's a lot of cooperation possible between the Waterkeepers' aspirations and yours. Sounds like there's a lot of synchronicity. So thank you very much for bringing these ideas to the fore, and thank you, Frédéric Laurent, for this introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so happy that we had this opportunity to meet with a waterkeeper. I'm now very impatient to meet any waterkeeper in the world. Please consider that the doors of Green Cross are open to you. And thank you, Frédéric, once again.
Okay, perfect.
So, as you see, Nicolas and Green Cross are doing important work all over the world, and I think there's fertile ground for collaboration between the Waterkeeper Alliance and Green Cross. I hope so. So now we're going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to share today's photographic journal by our in-house COP chronicler, Michal Fidler. Michael, show us what you have today.
Thank you. I'll start with a few general shots which are not taken directly at COP, but in front of the COP. Because every single morning I get there, I'm greeted by a group of protesters and group of police officers being around and just watching that something doesn't develop way too much. So there are a bunch of little groups of protesters having various agendas. On this picture, just notice the top left corner where there is the sign saying "Stop Climate Crime." I'm sure that you already noticed in many photos from the protest, this gentleman, this photo was actually taken on day one. And this gentleman is standing there or in front of all the various protests every single day. That's some serious determination from this gentleman. Of course, there are police officers everywhere around. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little less. And I would say they are just quietly watching. I have not seen any violence at all. They are just there, actually smiling and being very friendly. Every time I just ask for how do I get here or how do I get there, they politely answer with a smile. Today, I actually didn't get off by COP directly, but I took another 2 stops to the city center, directly to the George Square. And again, you cannot miss that COP is in town, because I was greeted by several various activists, not just me, but also the general public. So whoever was walking across the George Square was met by a few activists, and they were just doing some small workshops. And explaining their agenda to the general public. So the groups of these activists are sometimes smaller, sometimes larger. This is just a small group of 6 or 7 people. So then I walk again back to COP, and this is still not inside of the actual venue. It's in front of the venue. There is the fence basically dividing the area belonging to COP and what is not COP. So on the fence, I saw today many stripes, these colorful stripes. Each of the stripes is having a little message on it, written by a single person. Visually, it's very attractive. I don't really I cannot tell much more than that. Then there are also within the groups in front of COP some other people. They are just sitting there. This group is called Love and Grief for the Earth. I have not seen them doing anything else than just sitting there and quietly watching. Some other activists are a little bit more proactive. This gentleman, I think he belongs to a group called Fighting Grandfathers for Climate Change or Against Climate Change. I think they are from somewhere from Denmark or Norway, because they are having these Viking helmets, and they were more proactive. They were again approaching people, sharing some documents and so on. Here is yet another performance. Those are basic. This is basically a display of dead bodies. You can read what they are supposed to show. I mean, the display of the dead body was kind of passive. Here you can see some active action. When I walked to COP, I saw few vehicles which were containing this warning paper where it says, attention, your car is way too big, your engine is way too big, you are hurting the climate. That's why we decided to disarm your car by deflating one or more of your tires. So I checked, and yes, I mean, tires were deflated on several of the vehicles. It was always the big SUVs or sport cars, but yes, that's another phase of the active action. Last photo of some gentleman standing in front of a COP. He was in the costume of Darth Vader. I don't really know his agenda, but he was just singing. He had there the really big loudspeaker, and it was sort of a karaoke. I don't know what he's trying to achieve, but hopefully it's a little better, his agenda than his singing. Now, moving on, once I get into the venue, here is an example of one of the sort of semi-closed meetings, because it's only a limited number of people can get into the specific rooms. So here you can see that the social distance is really carried on. In this specific meeting was Nicola Sturgeon, the first Minister of Scotland, or basically the Prime Minister of Scotland. So she was discussing her views on climate change. Now, I met today quite a bit of indigenous people. There was a lot of activity around their small pavilion there. There were a lot of, or many interviews. There were various TV stations and radio stations and so on. So these indigenous people certainly had a chance to share their views. And I think the expression in the face of this lady and the gesture of her hands says the story. Some of the pavilions kind of seem to be dead already, meaning there are no side events going on at all. Noticeably, the Emirates pavilion or the Saudi Arabia pavilion, because there were just few people walking by and basically just taking snapshots of that. Yes, I was in that pavilion. It's kind of difficult to get to some of the plenaries because, again, the number of people that can get in is limited, so you need to wait in a queue, and then once you get almost there, you have to wait in another queue. So sometimes I simply give up and not even try to get into the rooms. But if you are, if you have patience enough, then you just wait in front of the rooms. Sometimes you meet quite interesting people. So this would be the Franz Timmermans, which is basically the European Commissioner for the European Green Deal. So I would say he is the highest ranking officer for EU climate policy. And I think the expression in his eyes said, yes, we are getting somewhere. So we will see tomorrow. Here's yet another face. You definitely do not know this gentleman, but I know him quite well because 15 years ago, I used to work in Tajikistan. We were running some water projects there, and I'm sure John will elaborate on this a little bit more, but the name of this gentleman is Daler Dolmachanov, and he used to work with us on clean water projects in Tajikistan. So I was really surprised when just walking by the Central Asia Pavilion, seeing that Daler is now with FAO. He used to work for CARE. He used to do a water project with us when we were running it through Rotary International. But again, John will probably say a little bit more on that. One last thing, one last point. I see that some people are already kind of relaxed, but some people are just working very hard. And this journalist an example of somebody working very, very hard. So she just ran out of the room. She didn't find a desk. So she just kneeled down and brought her notes right there. She was busy, very, very busy. On the other hand, when I walked by the Pakistani pavilion, it was not that busy at all, because as far as I know, the World Cup semi-final took place today. So Pakistani basically said, sorry, it's important day for us because we are planning the semi-final. So we are not on the climate change topic now. And of course, it's way better to watch it on 4K TV rather than a small laptop. Then, so I left Pakistan and walked around a few other pavilions. This is just shot from a Thai pavilion. They were quite busy. And I think the busiest person I've seen today was this lady in the Korean pavilion. She was working on 4 devices simultaneously. So she was on 2 computers, her phone, and iPad as well. So I think she's the workaholic of the day. So after maybe 2 hours of walking by again, I stopped once again in the Pakistani pavilion just to check. And so the latest news from COP26 is that unfortunately Pakistan lost against Australia by 5 wickets. So with that sad news, I'm turning it back to you, Casey.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Pakistan. I'm sorry you lost to Australia. Thank you, Michael, for those photos. Always interesting to get a peek into the conference from your eyes, and nice photos. We're now turning our sights to another of our fine water keepers. This one in Northern California, and she holds an unwelcome distinction that she will tell you about. So let's hear from Jennifer Kalt. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to the director of Humboldt Bay WATERKEEPER, Jennifer Kalt. So Jennifer, you have the distinction of having the highest percentage of sea level rise in California, maybe in the country. And also you've got an oyster industry that's being hurt and a Dungeness crab industry being damaged. So tell us about all that and what you want us to know about COP and what you'd like to tell the people of COP. Have at it.
Okay, sure. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so Humboldt Baykeeper is here in the far northwestern part of California, up in the heart of the redwood forest region. And we have the highest rate of sea level rise on the West Coast. And that's because we have a lot of tectonic activity that's causing the ground beneath the region to sink at the same rate as sea level is rising. So as you can see from the beautiful view behind me of Humboldt Bay, we have a lot of low-lying areas that have been developed over the last century. And they're protected by, quote unquote, protected by earthen levees that were built over a century ago. And a lot of them are falling apart. They're dealing with 18-inch higher water levels than when they were built. And so you know, we're grappling with a lot of sea level rise vulnerability along a highway, major highway that is, you know, connects our 2 biggest cities in our county, as well as a big important route for the region. But also the first commercially licensed nuclear power plant in the world was built here right across from the entrance to Humboldt Bay. And it's been fully decommissioned now, but the waste is buried on a bluff that's eroding just 115 feet from the edge of Humboldt Bay and about 44 feet above sea level today. So in 50 years, that is projected to be 4 foot higher sea levels at the base of this bluff. And as people know, there is no federal repository. There probably never will be. So we need to figure out a plan for what are we going to do? Are we going to armor that bluff and try to protect that in place while it becomes an island? Are we going to move it back from the bluff? Where would we move it to? It's really it's a sticky wicket, as they say. So yeah, we're dealing with tons of climate change issues here on Humboldt Bay. Sea level rise is just one of them. We have toxic algae and dying kelp beds in the ocean from a marine heat wave that decimated the sunflower sea star population along our entire west coast. And so the purple urchins have exploded, decimated the kelp beds, and that has led to a complete crash of abalone. And, you know, there's just a cascade of events that is happening in our oceans. Dungeness crab fishery is our last really, was our last really robust commercial fishery. And that has been really on the ropes since this big marine heat wave in, I believe it was 2014, because there was a huge toxic algae bloom that led to toxic levels of domoic acid in the crab. So the crab season was curtailed until March that year when the toxicity levels went down, and that coincided with the gray whale migration through our area. So led to a record number of whale entanglements, and then all these regulations that have been placed on the commercial crabbing industry. And so they're suffering terribly. And then, you know, I'm not even getting to ocean acidification. So we have a lot of issues that point to, we need to slow down climate change as fast as we possibly can. And so, you know, we're in California, one of the wealthiest states and one of the wealthiest countries in the world, but our region is not a wealthy region. In fact, in Humboldt County, people who have lower incomes tend to live right on the coast because it's very foggy. So people who can afford to buy houses inland will live a little inland where it's sunnier and warmer. So we have a lot of low income households at risk from sea level rise. We also have high mercury levels in fish here, in some fish, not all, but some of the highest levels of mercury in a coastal survey in California found the highest levels in mercury in leopard shark from Humboldt Bay, even though we have no known local source of mercury. So we think it's coming entirely from coal burning power plants around the world, probably in Asia particularly. And so we need to phase out coal. You know, it's not only is it, you know, contributing to the heat waves, the wildfires, the horrible smoke. Some people in California can't go outside for months at a time now for several years running because the smoke is so bad. And then on top of all that, we're actually experiencing a huge real estate rush here. And so it's driving up housing prices because a lot of people want to come and live on the coast to escape the wildfire and the smoke and the heat and the drought. And so this is causing a lot of, you know, disparities in the population that are, you know, just have been here a long time. We have a lot of poverty and a lot of the problems that go with it here in Humboldt County. But you know, it's getting worse because the affordability of housing is, you know, just plummeting with this real estate boom that's happening. So, so many different climate impacts here. And, you know, fortunately, we do have something that we can look to as a potential solution in our region. And that is the first floating offshore wind energy project on the West Coast, or the first offshore wind period on the West Coast is being proposed here because we have a lot of wind. It is very windy here. And so there's, you know, there's some reason to hope, as long as we can do that in a way that is going to be protective of the marine environment, which we all value here so much. that hopefully we can do our part to get off fossil fuels and slow climate change down. But at the same time, some people are proposing to take over a defunct railroad line through the incredible Eel River Canyon and Russian River as well, and export coal through Humboldt Bay to China and Japan for burning. So they are hoping to export coal from Wyoming, Powder River Basin coal, which is it's just mind-boggling to even think about putting this sort of development, a coal terminal on Humboldt Bay. So we are fighting that, and we're going to work hard to make sure that never happens. But it's a really uphill battle because of the railroad laws in this country. Railroads have long been used for all kinds of scams and schemes to get federal funding to line people's pockets who really have their own interests in mind, and not thinking about the environment or all the communities that they're going to be devastating, where those old railroad tracks go right through the heart of many, many communities on the North Coast. So
yeah, you have
luck.
You have a fistful of problems and issues. We spoke to earlier in the week. We spoke to Sharif Jamil, who's the waterkeeper in Bangladesh, and he has climate refugees because there is so much saltwater infusion because of the sea level rise in the delta. Bangladesh is the largest delta in the world, that the crops are no longer viable. There's too much salt in the water, and so the farmers have given up farming there, and they're all congregating in the city, which is causing an enormous problem. But here we are at home with a migration caused by climate change. The people leaving Sonoma, all those areas that were devastated by wildfires, are moving to your area. So we're seeing these kind of tectonic shifts even in the US of migration, ecosystems breaking down, suffering. And then the other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the windmills, which apparently are going to be floating windmills. That's an interesting phenomenon. I hadn't known about that. So tell us about that. That sounds like very unusual technology.
It is. It's fairly new, and it's the reason why there's no offshore wind on the West Coast. Our oceans are too deep. The continental shelf falls off pretty quickly here. So the permanent foundations like you would see on the East Coast of the US can't be built here, but they're basically built on a triangular platform that has hydraulics that float, and they've been tested in Portugal, where there's a huge amount of wave storm action. And so the plan is, the proposal is to build them here in Humboldt Bay and then tow them out completely finished with a barge, and to place them 20 miles offshore. And the idea is that Humboldt Bay doesn't have any bridge or any obstructions at the entrance, and these are so tall that they wouldn't fit under the Golden Gate Bridge, so they couldn't be built in the San Francisco Bay Area. They're 600 meters tall. And
you have enough draft to get them out your passageways. I think
sometimes
the Humboldt Bay is not very deep, right?
No, it's a pretty shallow bay. It has to be dredged every year, and then most years the Eel River dumps a whole bunch of sediment right in front of the entrance. But it could be shallow and deep enough for barges anyway. We actually get all of our fuel, gasoline and diesel, on barges from the San Francisco Bay Area here. So barges can make it through the deep water drafting ships, like for coal, say, for example. It would require massive amounts of dredging to keep the bay entrance open and the channels open for those kind of ships. But barges would, as I understand, work okay.
Is there anything we can help you with there in Humboldt Bay? Do you have any petitions you need signed, or do you want to direct us to a website to support you in your work to keep that coal plant at bay the railroaded bay or to promote wind in your watershed? What can we do?
Well, we do have a new coalition called No Coal in Humboldt, and you can find that online at nocoalinhumboldt.org. And we do have a petition to the Humboldt Bay Harbor District to develop policies and ordinances that would prohibit coal terminals from being placed on Humboldt Bay. So I'll send you that link, and yeah, if people want to sign that petition or join our coalition, I know there are people who care about Humboldt Bay all over the, not just California, but all over the country, and I don't know, maybe all over the world. People come here from all over the world for our very famous cannabis industry. So we get a lot of tourism from Europe and Israel and other parts of the world.
Yeah,
So.
I've heard about that. I think it's probably a popular destination for that reason. So that sounds good. And Humboldt Bay is a pretty large bay relative to the water bodies of California, right?
Yeah, it's the second largest estuary in California. And it's actually, we have very healthy eelgrass beds here. Something like 3/4 of the oysters produced in California are produced in Humboldt Bay. And the eelgrass seems to be having a buffering effect on ocean acidification inside the bay itself. But we also, I should mention, lots of contaminated sites around the bay from the timber industry. The timber industry that decimated our glorious redwood forest over the last century. They also left us a little present behind in the form of dioxins that are very persistent toxic chemicals, many of which are on low-lying areas or wetland fill. So as you talked about in Bangladesh, the groundwater rising and flooding these sites from below is going to push those contaminants, dioxins and other contaminants out into Humboldt Bay and further contaminate it. So we're working on a plan to prioritize which sites will be most at risk as sea level and groundwater rises to get them cleaned up before that happens.
And you won a lawsuit against the redwood lumber industry, right?
Well, Baykeeper has settled lawsuits over some lumber mills. That is true. Simpson Timber Company had a plywood mill right next to the only fishing pier on Humboldt Bay, and we sued them, and they settled and agreed to clean that site up, and so it is much cleaner today than it was, and which is really great because it was connected to a tidal ditch that was discharging dioxins into Humboldt Bay right next to our public fishing pier where people fish all the time. So that was great. There's still some contamination below the buildings though, and as groundwater rises, there could, potentially be more problems with that as time goes on, but we'll have to monitor it and see. But, a lot of these lumber mills, the people who did the polluting are either bankrupt companies or no longer living, and so there's really not much holding them accountable. And you see in the image behind me a big smokestack. That was a pulp mill that has since been shut down and is being considered to be turned into a salmon factory, basically a land-based aquaculture facility. And, that is actually redeveloping these sites is one of the only ways to get some of them cleaned up at this point. So what we have now is, an old pulp mill that's just sitting out there in the rain and all the runoff going into the groundwater in the bay. And, a Norwegian company which has proposed this, $500 million project that would include tearing down the smokestack and removing all this debris and, toxic hazardous waste from the site, and then redeveloping it with a fish factory that would, take in lot, 10 million gallons of water a day from Humboldt Bay, discharged 12 million into the ocean in an existing outfall pipe. And so we're working to make sure that that's, as protective of the marine environment as possible. But as far as the site itself, they will be, removing a lot of hazardous material and redeveloping the site with a modern stormwater system. So, in a lot of ways, we're just dealing with the damage that was done in the past and how to best clean it up. And, the nuclear waste storage site is another example of that, how do we deal with these past poor decisions that were made?
Yeah, legacy developments that are, that are still existing and contaminating and just potential hazard spots. So we've got that. We hear that so often all over the country. We're always playing catch up. We just don't seem to get it right. We thought asbestos was a good idea. So listen, it was really nice to get a little insight into Humboldt Bay and to learn a little bit about your watershed. You're doing valiant work, so we salute you. We will run those websites and see if we can get some people to sign the petitions. And we wish you the wind at your back or at your front or wherever it's going to be out here somewhere, and to keep the coal at bay or in the ground. So thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for joining us today. It's nice to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for doing the good work of following what's going on over there.
Yeah, we're reporting two more days now. Yeah, so it's interesting on the ground here. Yeah, well, oh my God, so much work to do, but we're undeterred. There's reason for cynicism, but there's also reason for hope. There's a lot going on, a lot of challenges, a ton of challenges, but some really smart people working on it, and waterkeepers all over the world doing wonderful work. So we'll see, but we have to keep at it. We have to keep pushing and driving forward. So anyway, thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks. It was really nice to chat with you for a while.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a great
good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
I'm so impressed with the waterkeepers that we meet over the last 10, 11 days, and the others that we, that are working all over the world. They're really inspiring. And there's Jennifer, so capable and knowledgeable about her watershed and working hard. So really proud to be a part of this organization. John, you are a traveling man. In fact, you had to move just before we went on air from one pavilion to another. It sounds like you're well situated. There's some kind of commotion next door. So tell us about your travels today. All yours, John.
Well, I'm here in the Congo River Basin Pavilion. It's a pavilion composed of 17 nations that come together as part of a commission that deals with their region. I was earlier in the Japan Pavilion, but I made a rookie mistake. I asked for permission, and that just confused the person who was there and not in authority, and she went all conservative on me, so I bailed out. But I had a very good day in that pavilion, which is why I selected it. But there's a few photos in here from the Japan Pavilion, and we'll get to those. But on my way in today, I did notice the newspapers left on the seats of the bus, and Boris Johnson was taking something of a beating for various political and COP-related matters. So politics goes on. And I was interested to see those photos about the tire deflation on vehicles that were deemed too large. Well, I'll tell you, as a Floridian, a rural Floridian, driving or moving about this community, all of these vehicles look quite modest in size. So their standard's a little different. If they had been in my county, I think every single vehicle would have flat tires. So today was November 11th. It's the Cities, Regions, and Built Environments theme day here at COP. And a few of the sessions I attended were on that theme. but some were more general. The sessions are also winding down. I noticed today a lot more carts of beer and wine being ferried about to the various pavilions. So they're winding down, kicking back, and declaring victory on their implementation of their pavilion programs, and doing a little celebrating with their colleagues. But I've got a few photos, and Michael, go ahead and start with the first one. And apparently I missed Michael at the Central Asian Pavilion by a matter of minutes, because I wandered in and basically encountered the same interesting coincidence that he did. They were talking about the NDCs of Tajikistan, the reduction goals that they've established for their nation in CO2, and going through the various accounting and qualitative assessments necessary to assemble these and update them. Next photo. And I saw this image, and I said, gosh, that guy looks familiar. And I saw the name Dollar, and I said, we knew a guy named Dollar. And it turns out it's the same fellow who had been an engineer with CARE International at the time, and Michael was managing an office there for us for Intelligentsia International. We were doing Rotary projects, clean waters for villages. And Michael did a tremendous job organizing projects over there and setting up an office where we employed a number of students. At any given time, there were from maybe 5 to 10 or 12 students there. And we would put them to work on various things, including these water projects. And we teamed them up with professionals like Dollar, who would do the hard hydraulic engineering and get the job done, whereas the students would help with the organizing and some of the design work, some of the theoretical design work. So it was an excellent opportunity for those young people, and they did a great job and went on terrific careers thanks to the efforts of Michael over there and Dollar, who was a great mentor for many of the young engineers. So he's moved on from wash from water, sanitation and hygiene projects with CARE to now working with the FAO, a UN food organization based in Rome. And he is one of the officers responsible for tracking Tajikistan's carbon reductions. Next photo. So he talked some about the process, and it was clear that he was trying to demonstrate that this isn't just a static accounting procedure, but it's a dynamic set of goals, and that as they do this accounting and track the carbon, they begin to identify other opportunities to increase their carbon reduction goals. So that was good to hear him approaching it not as a static project, but as a dynamic, growing, living effort. Next photo. Then I went on to the water pavilion. I always stop at the water pavilion early in the day to see what's going on there. And today they were on theme. Next photo. They were talking about cities and built environments and the resiliency for urban water systems in the climate crisis. And next slide. Lee Pitcher was speaking, and he's a chief officer for the County of Yorkshire, which he explained drains 20% of the entire area of England. So a fairly large watershed, and at the mouth of their river, the city of Hull, and talking about resilience. And he was explaining that from his perspective and from the perspective of the communities, that climate change is largely first felt by people through either too much or too little water. And he was describing the vast array of programs they were implementing to help sort of protect their citizens, their residents, against these implications. Next slide. And here's an image showing the Yorkshire area up in northern England. Next slide. Then I went over to the Science Pavilion. And actually, I listened to two sessions at the Science Pavilion. One was on the World Meteorological Organization. Next slide. they were talking about how they have to do the weather reporting and share this with particularly developing nations who don't have extremely large weather forecasting and reporting agencies. So this organization, WMO, takes weather data, raw data from nations throughout the world and shares it with other nations and contributes to the forecasting. But they found that they have to move beyond basic forecasting and move into areas of giving these nations more of an idea of the implications of these weather events, because they cited an example of a large typhoon in 2013 that devastated the Philippines and moved into China and cost more than 6,000 lives. And the nations sort of acted as if they were caught unaware despite having received notice of this storm, but they thought it was going to be a windstorm, not a flood event, as what turned out to be, in effect, a tsunami for them. So WMO is working to evolve their data collection and database and reporting methodologies to help protect the people more robustly in the face of these natural disasters. Next photo. Then I wandered by Pakistan and kept up with the cricket. They had actually quite a few people there when I was wandering by. So I guess that's how they're going to solve the problem. Next photo. Japan. Japan always has a science and technology intense pavilion. And this year was no different. I went in and each of the individuals standing next to their particular piece of science or technology was an absolute expert. They knew what they were talking about. These were the design engineers and scientists and the professors that contributed to them. And they were dutifully standing next to their part of the exhibition and delivering as much information as you were prepared to take in. Next photo. I was talking to this engineer who was part of a company that had designed a new turbine system to, in effect, drive systems to generate electricity. But this one driven not by natural gas, but by hydrogen. So this is part of one of these systems where nations with existing oil and gas fields that want alternative uses for this are talking about using concentrated industrial facilities at the point of import or the point of production of the oil and gas, and using that energy to produce hydrogen, and then using that as a fuel to be distributed throughout their nation or the world, and then accompanied by the carbon capture and sequestration program. So they're pretty serious about this. It was describing that their company is perhaps one of only 4 that has developed these hydrogen turbines. Next photo. Also spoke with the professor, the fellow in the middle there, with his assistant scientist. And he was part of a remote sensing exhibit where they were collecting a vast array of terrestrial and aquatic data and using it to drive sophisticated computer models. And these computer models not only dealt with the hydrology, and the hydrology is a fairly traditional application of the remote sensing data to see how much rainfall occurs, how much leaves the property, leaves the watershed as runoff, how much infiltrates into the soil, and so on. But they took it a step further, and they were analyzing the leaf characteristics of the canopy, the signature of gases being emitted from the soils, and they were inferring various properties of the soil and the deeper groundwater, and therefore modeling, in effect, the microbial activity in that soil horizon and the resulting methane carbon dioxide dynamics. As these, the vadose zone, the aerated zone of the soil, as the water table moves up and down within that area, the chemistry of this shifts. So you move from a system that generates more carbon dioxide to one that generates more methane. And the methane is far more potent. So if you're going to have any gas generation, you want it to be CO2 rather than methane. And ideally, you want carbon dioxide net uptake from these soils. So the models that they were developing integrated with physics and chemistry, this was by far the most sophisticated natural systems model in any pavilion here at COP. So they sent their top science experts, Japan did, and it was very interesting speaking with them. They also had an exhibit, and I don't believe I have a photo of it here. Next photo. Yes, here's their little landscape model that they used as a basis for explaining their data collection and their science. But they also had one of these floating wind turbine displays. So the engineer managing that exhibit talked about how there's only a few companies that manage this technology, and it's not really manufactured in a particular location and then shipped great distances. Instead, the people with the expertise go to the remote locations, those areas with the deeper water that cannot have fixed base wind turbines, and they work with the local community, the local manufacturers to produce these. So they'll bring in the core turbine from the manufacturer around the world, wherever it might be, but then these Japanese engineers help fabricate, design, and help the local community install these turbines offshore. And their particular configuration involved basically a large concrete cylinder as ballast at the bottom, overlain with a steel, in effect, cylindrical drum that would contain the air. And then they would place upon that the mast and the turbine. So it's very interesting in talking about the transport, and they would anchor these to the sea bottom with 3 large chains or cables. And that's the way they manage these particular turbines. Next photo. Then I went over to Turkey, as I mentioned before, another professor speaking at the Turkey exhibit about fire and its impact on their communities. Next photo. There were a couple of fire exhibits at the US Center as well, but he talked about the implications of this past year's Turkish fires. Next photo. He also talked about the rainfall distribution, how climate change is forecast to change the amount of precipitation. The red and yellow areas, orange areas, indicate areas that are predicted to have much drier conditions, much less precipitation. So you can see our western states, you can see Spain, and that band over through Yugoslavia and Eastern Europe, Italy, and Turkey, heavily affected, as is North Africa and South Africa as well. But other areas that are likely to get much more precipitation in the future. Next photo. Then I went back to the Science Center, and they had a presentation on the impacts of COVID on air quality. And I found this particularly interesting because it was somewhat counterintuitive. You know, we talked about the large industrial sort of suspension of activity that occurred early on in the program through 2020, and the temporary decrease in CO2 emissions. But they said that that really wasn't evident in the global data collection, whereas countries may have reduced their CO2 emissions system-wide. The concentration of CO2 continued to climb. What did change were the high altitude aerosols, basically the pollutants that come from our burning of fossil fuels and other industrial activities. And these have traditionally been cited as having a solar masking effect, global dimming. They reduce the incoming solar radiation. So they noted a depression in the shortwave radiation, but they also noted an increase in temperature. They also talked about air quality in general and how many deaths occur from poor air quality globally, and comparing it to major diseases around the world, it's really a significant killer. Next slide. And he emphasized that these air pollution effects are an extreme form of environmental justice because it hits the developing nations disproportionately, particularly India. Next photo. I guess that may be the last photo. There were a couple of movies. I did a couple of videos from the US pavilion, the US Center, about NASA. NASA has some really spiffy videos, basically rendering their computer models of air circulation, including the smokes, the mixing with the sea salts. Here we go. So you can see the evolution of the fire zones throughout a year. So they change in latitude as the seasons change, and these are disproportionately emphasized. It's not like these entire areas are burning, but rather these are the areas that experience the increased incidences of fires throughout the years, through the seasons. And you can see it shifts in Africa from the central latitudes down to the more southern latitudes. And the Siberian fires seem to be pervasive throughout the year. So this was an interesting video. The NASA scientists have had a number of presentations at the US Center, perhaps 2 each day, which is quite a few. All right, so I think that's enough. I had a very good day here, enjoyed it thoroughly. Back to you, Casey.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. And it seems like the floating turbines, the wind turbines, may have been exactly what Jennifer was talking about. They're planning on in Humboldt Bay. So I wonder if that Japanese company may be your supplier. And that I was particularly scared about all that fire it seemed to see in the Amazon region. That's a kind of terrifying proposition if there's going to be warming to such a degree that the part of the Amazon catches fire. But that's great. Thank you, John, for that. Tomorrow, we're going to do something a little bit different. We will have an interview with Gideon Bromberg, who's the waterkeeper of the Jordan River in Israel, doing amazing work. It's really wonderful to hear what he's up to. And then we're going to spend a little time, our team, John, Chris, myself, Rock, and Mick and Michael, hopefully, to do a little compendium of the week. What went right, what went wrong, what we think might be coming down the pike, and where we stand at the end of this conference, this 13-day conference. So we look forward to sharing that with you tomorrow at the same time, 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. in the UK. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow. Thank you.